Hey, you. What's in the cup and why are you sitting here?
Coffee. I'm sitting in a public park. Am I being detained?
I need your ID. Now.
Then articulate a crime, officer. Because right now this stop is unlawful.
The body camera footage that would eventually force the resignation of a police chief and cost the city of Chicago nearly $1 million began in silence. There was no audio for the first 30 seconds, just the buffer, but the image was crystal clear. It showed a pristine, sun-drenched morning in Millennium Park. The grass was manicured, the city skyline gleamed in the background, and the benches were mostly empty. On one of those benches sat a man who was arguably the most powerful law enforcement official in the entire state of Illinois. And Officer Kyle Miller, a 29-year-old patrolman with a history of aggression that had been overlooked for far too long, was walking straight toward him. Marcus Thorne was 58 years old, dressed in a tailored navy wool coat over a charcoal suit. He wasn't wearing a tie. It was his one small rebellion on a Tuesday morning before heading into the relentless grind of the Attorney General's office. In his hand, he held a simple paper coffee cup from a local roaster. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was simply existing in a public space, reviewing mental notes for an upcoming racketeering case against a sophisticated interstate theft ring. Thorne had spent 30 years climbing the legal ladder from public defender to prosecutor to federal judge and finally to the elected position of state attorney general. He was a man who knew the penal code better than he knew the back of his own hand. But Officer Miller didn't see the state attorney general. He didn't see a legal scholar. Through the lens of his own biases and the adrenaline of a slow morning shift, he saw a black man sitting alone in a high-traffic tourist area holding a cup. In Miller's mind, this wasn't a citizen enjoying the city he served. It was a loitering subject, a potential vagrant trying to blend in, or perhaps someone drinking alcohol in public. It was an assumption born of instinct, but it was the wrong kind of instinct, the kind that legal experts and civil rights activists had been warning about for decades. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to take a second. Pause and look at where you are right now. Are you safe? Do you feel free? Now imagine that freedom being stripped away simply because someone with a badge decided you didn't look like you belonged. If you believe that law enforcement should be held to the highest standard of conduct, smash that subscribe button right now. We cover the stories that the mainstream media often glosses over. You need to see this. Officer Miller's boots crunched on the gravel path. Thorne didn't look up immediately. He was deep in thought, savoring the bitterness of the dark roast coffee. He had dealt with police officers his entire adult life. He respected the profession. He had attended their funerals, authorized their overtime grants, and defended their qualified immunity when it was justified. But he also knew the dark side of the badge. He had prosecuted officers who beat suspects in holding cells. He had signed the indictments for detectives who planted evidence. He knew that for every 100 good officers, there was one who viewed the public as the enemy. He didn't know yet that Officer Miller was that one. Miller stopped 3 feet from the bench. He stood with his thumbs hooked into his vest, a stance of dominance that he had practiced in the academy mirror but had never quite earned in the streets. He loomed over the seated man, casting a shadow across Thorne's face. The silence stretched for a moment too long. Thorne slowly raised his head, his expression calm, his eyes intelligent and weary. He didn't smile, but he didn't scowl either. He just waited. "Morning," Miller said, but it wasn't a greeting. It was a challenge. The tone was flat hard and devoid of the protect and serve courtesy that was supposed to be the department's motto. "Good morning, officer," Thorne replied. His voice was a deep baritone, the voice of a man who commanded courtrooms with a whisper. "Can I help you with something?" "You can start by telling me what's in the cup," Miller snapped, nodding toward the paper cup in Thorne's hand. Thorne looked at the cup, then back at the officer. He blinked, genuinely confused by the pettiness of the opening salvo. "Coffee," Thorne said. "Black, no sugar." You sure about that? Miller took a half-step closer, invading Thorne's personal space. We've had complaints about guys drinking out here. Public consumption is a citation, sometimes an arrest depending on how the subject acts. Thorne tightened his grip on the cup slightly. He looked around the empty park. There was no one else nearby to have made a complaint. This was a fishing expedition, plain and simple. I assure you, officer, it is coffee. And since I am not engaging in any criminal activity, I'm going to go back to enjoying my morning. This was the moment. The off-ramp was right there. Miller could have nodded, said, "Just checking," and walked away. But he didn't. He couldn't. His authority had been gently brushed aside, and his ego wouldn't allow it. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in compliance, and he was about to destroy his life to get it. The interaction had lasted less than 60 seconds, but the dynamic was already set in stone. On one side, a man who represented the pinnacle of state law enforcement armed with decades of constitutional knowledge. On the other, a young officer with a chip on his shoulder and a fundamental misunderstanding of the Fourth Amendment. I didn't say you could go back to anything, Officer Miller said, his voice rising just enough to attract the attention of a couple walking their dog 50 yards away. I'm conducting an investigation here. I need to see some identification. Marcus Thorne didn't move to reach for his wallet. He didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharpening into a razor's edge. This was the dance he knew so well from case files, but rarely experienced from this side of the bench. Officer, Thorne said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming professorial. You are requesting my identification. Is that a request, or is it a lawful order? Miller blinked. Most people just handed it over. It's an order. I need to know who you are, and I need to verify you don't have any outstanding warrants. For an order to be lawful, Thorne said, reciting the statute from memory as if he were reading it from a book. You must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am currently committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime. Terry v. Ohio, Delaware v. Prouse. You suspect me of public consumption of alcohol. I have told you this is coffee. You have no evidence to the contrary, no smell of alcohol, no slurred speech, no erratic behavior. So on what specific facts are you basing your detention? Miller's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He wasn't used to suspects citing Supreme Court case law. He was used to fear. He was used to confusion. He wasn't equipped for a lecture. Don't play lawyer with me, Miller spat out. I'm not asking you again. Stand up, put the cup down, and give me your ID. Thorne remained seated. He took a deliberate sip of his coffee, maintaining eye contact over the rim of the cup. It was a move of supreme confidence, bordering on arrogance, but entirely within his rights. I am not playing officer. I am asserting my rights under the Illinois Constitution and the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Illinois is not a stop and identify state unless there is a valid detention based on reasonable suspicion. You have none. Therefore, I am not obligated to identify myself. Am I free to go, or are you detaining me? You're detained. Miller barked his hand, drifting toward the handcuffs on his belt. For what crime? Disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order, and suspicion of public intoxication. Miller was stacking charges now, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. He was digging a hole, and instead of climbing out, he was asking for a bigger shovel. Thorne shook his head slowly, almost sadly. Officer, look at me. Look at my suit. Look at my demeanor. Do I look like a public intoxication case to you? If you arrest me, you will be filing a false police report. That is a felony. Do you understand the implications of that? Are you threatening me? Miller stepped back and keyed his radio. Dispatch, show me out with a non-compliant male subject at Millennium Park. Send me a backup unit. The escalation was palpable. A jogger stopped to watch. The couple with the dog pulled out a phone. The lens of public scrutiny was now focused on Officer Miller, but he was too blinded by rage to see it. He saw only a defiant black man who refused to submit to his authority. "I am not threatening you," Thorne said calmly. "I am warning you. I am trying to save your career. You are making a mistake that you will not be able to undo. Walk away. Just walk away." "Stand up!" Miller screamed, finally snapping. "Turn around!" Thorne sighed. He placed the coffee cup gently on the bench next to him. He knew exactly how this would play out now. He could have pulled out his badge, the gold shield that identified him as the Attorney General. He could have dropped names. He could have ended it instantly, but Marcus Thorne was a man of principle. If this officer treated the Attorney General this way, how did he treat the janitor? How did he treat the unemployed mechanic? How did he treat the teenager walking home from school? Thorne decided then and there that he wouldn't use his badge to escape. He would let the system work or fail exactly as it would for any other citizen. He would be the test case. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I am complying with your physical commands under duress," Thorne stated clearly for the benefit of the bystander's camera. "I am not resisting, but I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful arrest." "Put your hands behind your back," Miller growled, spinning Thorne around with unnecessary force. "You're making a mistake, son," Thorne whispered the first time he had used a colloquialism. "A very big mistake. Have you ever seen someone so confident in their wrongness that it made you cringe? Officer Miller was about to destroy his life over a cup of coffee. Let me know in the comments if you think police officers need more training on the Constitution. Type yes if you think they do. The sensation of cold steel ratcheting around one's wrists is something you never forget. For Marcus Thorne, it was a sensation he hadn't felt in 40 years, not since a protest in his college days. But now, as the state attorney general, the feeling was different. It wasn't fear. It was a cold, calculating fury. He felt the metal bite into his skin as Officer Miller squeezed the cuffs tighter than necessary, a petty, punitive measure known in the force as compliance via discomfort. "You're tight on the wrists, officer," Thorne said, his voice devoid of pain, merely stating a fact. "Don't move and it won't hurt," Miller retorted, grabbing Thorne by the elbow. By now, a small crowd had gathered. The morning commuters, the tourists, the joggers, they had formed a semicircle. 3 phones were raised, recording every second. Miller, fueled by adrenaline and the false confidence of the badge, puffed his chest out. He thought he was performing for the public, showing them how he handled trouble. He had no idea he was starring in his own career obituary. "What is he being arrested for?" a woman in workout gear shouted from 10 feet away. "He was just sitting there." "Back up, ma'am," Miller shouted, pointing a finger at her. "Interfering with a police investigation is an arrestable offense. Back up." Thorne turned his head slightly. "Do not engage him, ma'am. Keep recording. Please, just keep recording." "Shut up." Miller shoved Thorne forward, forcing him off balance. "Walk. Now." They began the march toward the patrol car parked on the perimeter of the park. Every step was a violation of Thorne's civil rights, and every step added another 0 to the eventual settlement check. Thorne's mind was racing, cataloging the procedural errors. No Miranda warning read, no articulation of the crime, excessive force during handcuffing, retaliatory charge stacking. It was a textbook example of everything his office was trying to root out of the Chicago Police Department. As they reached the squad car, a second unit arrived. Officer Sarah Jenkins, a younger officer with only 2 years on the force, stepped out. She looked at the scene, her partner red-faced and aggressive. The suspect, calm, well-dressed, and dignified even in handcuffs. Her stomach dropped. She had good instincts, and her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "What do we have, Kyle?" Jenkins asked, approaching cautiously. "Disorderly. Failure to ID. Resisting." Miller panted, opening the back door of his cruiser. Guy thinks he's a lawyer. Refused to identify himself during a suspicious person stop. Jenkins looked at Thorne. She saw the quality of the wool coat. She saw the calm intelligence in his eyes. She looked at the suspicious item, a coffee cup left on the bench. "Sir," Jenkins said, addressing Thorne, "do you have ID on you?" "I do," Thorne said calmly. "It is in my inner jacket pocket." I attempted to explain the Fourth Amendment requirements to your colleague, but he was uninterested in the law. Jenkins looked at Miller. "Kyle, did you have PC probable cause?" "I had a refusal to ID," Miller snapped. "That's obstruction." "That's not how it works, Kyle," Jenkins whispered, trying to de-escalate her own partner. "If there's no underlying crime, he doesn't have to ID." "I'm taking him in," Miller said, slamming the door on her concerns. "He wants to play games. We'll play games at the station. He can sit in holding until he remembers his name." Miller shoved Thorne into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard, the space cramped. Thorne maneuvered his tall frame into the awkward position, his shoulders straining against the handcuffs. The door slammed shut, sealing him in the cage. The smell of stale sweat and industrial cleaner filled his nose. Through the plexiglass divider, Thorne watched Miller get into the driver's seat. The officer was breathing heavily, still riding the high of the confrontation. He turned to Jenkins, who was standing outside the window, looking worried. "I got this, Sarah. Go handle that domestic on Whacker. I'm transporting." Jenkins hesitated. She looked at Thorne in the back seat. Thorne met her eyes and gave a barely perceptible nod as if absolving her of what was about to happen. She stepped back and Miller threw the car into drive. The drive to the 1st District station took 15 minutes. Miller didn't speak. He blasted the radio sports talk, trying to drown out the silence coming from the back seat. Thorne sat perfectly still. He wasn't thinking about the discomfort. He was thinking about the phone call he would make. He was thinking about the conversation he would have with the chief of police. He was thinking about Officer Miller's pension. "You comfortable back there, counselor?" Miller taunted, glancing in the rearview mirror as they hit a red light. Thorne didn't respond to the taunt. He simply said, "Officer Miller, for the record, I am requesting that you preserve all body camera footage and dash camera footage from this encounter. Consider this a formal preservation notice." Miller laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Yeah. You'll get your day in court, pal. Hope you can afford a lawyer." The irony was so thick it nearly choked the air in the car. Thorne closed his eyes. Afford a lawyer. He was the man who supervised every prosecutor in the state. He was the law. The squad car rolled into the sally port of the 1st District station. The heavy metal gate clattered shut behind them, cutting off the sunlight. This was the belly of the beast, the transition point where citizens became inmates. Miller parked the car and killed the engine. He got out, adjusted his belt, and opened the rear door. "Let's go. End of the line," Miller said. Thorne swung his legs out. His knees were stiff. He stood up, towering over Miller again. He walked calmly toward the intake door, guided by Miller's hand on his tricep. They walked through the secure hallway, the buzz of the electronic locks marking their progress. They entered the booking area. It was a busy morning. A few drunks from the night before were being processed out, and a shoplifter was arguing with a sergeant. The air smelled of coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was a dinosaur. He had 35 years on the job. He had white hair, a mustache that looked like a push broom, and eyes that had seen every lie ever told in the city of Chicago. He was 2 months away from retirement. He was drinking coffee and reading the sports section when Miller walked in with his collar. "What do we have, Miller?" Kowalski asked, without looking up, his voice gravelly. "Disorderly conduct. Refusal to ID. Resisting." Miller recited his mantra. "Guy wouldn't show ID in the park, acted like he owned the place." "Name?" Kowalski asked, picking up a pen. "John Doe for now. Refused to state it." Kowalski sighed. He hated John Doe's. It meant extra paperwork. He finally looked up. "All right, buddy, let's cut the crap. What's your—" Kowalski stopped. The pen fell from his hand. It clattered onto the desk, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Kowalski squinted. He blinked. He leaned forward over the high desk. He looked at the man in handcuffs. He looked at the suit. He looked at the face that had been on the nightly news 3 days ago announcing a new anti-gang initiative. The blood drained from Sergeant Kowalski's face. He turned pale, then a shade of gray. "Miller," Kowalski whispered. His voice was trembling. "Yes, Sarge, I'm going to throw him in cell 2 while I write this up." "Miller," Kowalski said louder this time. He stood up. "Take those cuffs off." Miller frowned. "What no, Sarge? He's uncooperative. I need to process him. Take the goddamn cuffs off right now." Kowalski roared, his voice cracking with panic. The entire booking room froze. The shoplifter stopped arguing. The other officers looked over. Miller was stunned. "Sarge, what is wrong with you? This guy is a suspect." Kowalski walked around the desk. He moved faster than he had in 10 years. He approached Thorne, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender and apology. He looked at Miller with a mixture of pity and absolute horror. "You don't know who this is, do you?" Kowalski asked Miller. "He's a guy loitering in the park," Miller said, but the doubt was starting to creep in. He saw the fear in the sergeant's eyes. Kowalski turned to Thorne. "Mr. Attorney General, sir, I don't know what to say." The words hung in the air. Attorney General. Miller felt the world tilt on its axis. His stomach dropped through the floor. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. He looked at the man in the handcuffs, the man he had shoved, the man he had taunted. Thorne looked at Kowalski. "Hello, Sergeant. I believe your officer here has arrested me for drinking coffee." "Unlock him!" Kowalski screamed at Miller. "Unlock him now!" Miller's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the handcuffs. He fumbled, dropped the keys, picked them up. His breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. "Attorney General. Oh my God." He finally managed to turn the lock. The cuffs clicked open. Thorne brought his hands forward. He rubbed his wrists where the red indentations were clearly visible. He adjusted his suit jacket. He smoothed his lapels. He turned to Officer Miller. Miller couldn't meet his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terror of a man watching his future incinerate. "Officer Miller?" Thorne said, his voice quiet, deadly calm. "You asked for my identification. I believe now is the appropriate time to provide it." Thorne reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the Illinois Attorney General gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Next to it was his ID card. "Marcus Thorne, Attorney General, State of Illinois." Miller stared at the badge. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. I didn't know," Miller stammered. "Sir, I didn't know." "That," Thorne said, "is exactly the problem. You didn't know who I was, but you treated me like a criminal because of how I looked. If I were a plumber, would I still be in those cuffs? If I were a teacher, would I be in a cell right now?" Thorne turned to Kowalski. "Sergeant, I want the watch commander down here. I want the captain called, and I want the digital copies of the booking report started. Do not delete anything." "Sir," Kowalski said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We can release you. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. We don't need to file." "No." Thorne cut him off. "You will process this arrest. You will generate the report. Officer Miller believed he had probable cause. Let him put it in writing. I want everything documented. Every single word." The 1st District Station went into meltdown. It is difficult to describe the level of panic that ensues when a police department realizes they have falsely arrested the highest-ranking lawyer in the state. It's not just fear. It's an existential crisis. Phones were ringing off the hook. Lieutenants were sprinting down hallways. The captain, a man named Robert Halloway who was hoping to make deputy chief next year, was driving 90 miles per hour toward the station, screaming into his Bluetooth headset. Thorne was ushered into the captain's office, not a cell, but he refused the offer of water or coffee. He sat in a chair, waiting. He wasn't being arrogant. He was being evidence. He needed his demeanor to remain unimpeachable. Officer Miller had been banished to the break room. His gun and badge had been taken by Sergeant Kowalski just for safety while they sorted this out. Miller sat at a plastic table, his head in his hands. Other officers walked by, whispering. They knew. Everyone knew. "Dead man walking," someone muttered. Miller didn't argue. He replayed the morning in his head. Why didn't I just walk away? Why did I have to be right? 20 minutes later, Captain Halloway burst into the office. He was out of breath, his tie crooked. He looked at Thorne, then at the red marks on Thorne's wrists. He closed his eyes for a second, praying this was a nightmare. "General Thorne," Halloway said, breathless. I cannot apologize enough. This is a catastrophic failure of judgment by my officer." "It's not just judgment, Captain," Thorne said coolly. "It's training. It's culture. Your officer stopped me because I was a black man in a nice coat sitting in a park. He escalated because I knew the law. He arrested me because his ego was bruised. He will be dealt with, severely," Halloway promised. Look, sir, we can void the arrest. It never happened. I'll drive you back to your office personally. We can handle this internally." Thorne stood up. He walked over to the window that looked out onto the squad room. "Captain, if you void this arrest, you are participating in a cover-up. I was handcuffed. I was placed in a car. I was transported. My freedom was restricted. That is an arrest. If you wipe the record, you are falsifying data." Halloway went pale. He realized then that Thorne wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for a reckoning. "I want the arrest processed," Thorne continued. "I want to be released on a signature bond just like any other citizen charged with a misdemeanor. And then I am going to sue you. I am going to sue Officer Miller, and I am going to sue the city." "Sir, please," Halloway pleaded. "This will destroy the department's reputation. The media. The reputation was destroyed when your officer put handcuffs on an innocent man for drinking coffee," Thorne snapped. "The media is just the mirror. If you don't like the reflection, don't blame the glass." Thorne walked out of the office. He went back to the booking desk. "Fingerprint me, Sergeant. Take my mugshot." "Sir, I can't," Kowalski begged. "Do it," Thorne commanded. "Follow the procedure. If you treat me differently than the kid from the South Side, you are proving my point. Book me." And so they did. The Attorney General of Illinois stood against the height chart. He turned to the left. He turned to the right. The camera clicked. Flash. Flash. That mugshot Marcus Thorne dignified, staring straight into the lens with eyes of fire, would become the most famous image in Chicago for the next decade. As he was finally released, signing his own recognizance paperwork, Thorne walked out the front door of the precinct. A massive crowd of reporters had already gathered. The video from the park had hit Twitter. It had hit TikTok. It was trending #coffeearrest. Thorne stopped on the steps of the police station. He adjusted his cuffs. The microphones were thrust into his face. "Mr. Attorney General, were you arrested?" "What happened?" Thorne looked at the cameras. "Today I was reminded of a hard truth," he said. "That credentials do not protect you from bias. That the law is only as good as the people enforcing it. And that we have a lot of work to do." The lawsuit landed on the city desk's lap on Thursday morning, less than 48 hours after the incident. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, Thorne vs. City of Chicago et al. It alleged violations of the Fourth and 14th Amendments, false imprisonment battery, and malicious prosecution. But unlike most lawsuits that sought money, this one sought something far more expensive: structural change. The video footage from the bystander was released alongside the body camera footage which Thorne's office had demanded be made public immediately. The contrast was devastating. The public saw Miller's aggression. They saw Thorne's calm. They heard the specific citations of case law. They heard Miller's sneering dismissal. "Don't play lawyer with me." The internet exploded. He told the AG not to play lawyer, LOL. This is the most satisfying "I told you so" in history. Fire him. Arrest him. Throw away the key. But beneath the viral mockery, there was a seething anger. People realized that if this could happen to Marcus Thorne, it could happen to anyone. The comment sections were filled with stories, thousands of them, of regular people who had been bullied, ticketed, or arrested by officers like Miller, but who didn't have the power to fight back. Inside the police department, the investigation into Officer Miller was swift and brutal. Internal affairs, usually criticized for moving at a glacial pace, worked around the clock. They pulled Miller's file. They pulled his body camera history for the last 3 years. What they found was a pattern, a terrifying pattern. Miller had a habit of pretextual stops, stopping people for loitering or jaywalking, and then escalating the encounter until he found a reason to arrest them for resisting. He targeted minorities at a rate 4 times higher than his peers. He had 18 citizen complaints in 5 years. Most had been dismissed as unfounded or exonerated by a lax oversight system. But they couldn't dismiss this one. On Friday afternoon, the police chief resigned. He cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. He had lost control of his officers, and the Attorney General had exposed it on live television. Officer Miller sat in his union representative's office. The rep, a tough-as-nails lawyer named Stan, looked at the video. He looked at Miller. He closed the laptop. "Kyle, I can't save you," Stan said. "But I followed procedure. I thought he was suspicious," Miller cried. "You arrested the Attorney General for drinking coffee, Kyle. You told him he didn't know the law. You have 18 complaints in your file. They are going to feed you to the wolves to save the department. You're done. They can't fire me without a hearing." "Oh, you'll get a hearing," Stan said dryly. "And Thorne will probably testify. Do you want that? Do you want to be cross-examined by the best prosecutor in the state on public record?" Miller slumped in his chair. The reality finally hit him. It wasn't just his job. It was his identity. He was a cop. Without the badge, who was he? Just another guy in a world he had spent years bullying. The settlement conference took place 3 months later. The city of Chicago didn't want to go to trial. A jury trial with Marcus Thorne as the plaintiff would be a bloodbath. They wanted to write a check and make it go away. Thorne sat across from the city attorneys. They looked tired. They slid a piece of paper across the table. $500, $1,000, the lead attorney said. "No admission of wrongdoing. Case sealed." Thorne didn't even look at the paper. He slid it back. "No," Thorne said. "Mr. Attorney General, that's a standard offer for a false arrest with no physical injury." "I don't want your money," Thorne said. "I want the reforms. I sent over a list of demands. Consent decree, mandatory retraining on the Fourth Amendment for every officer, a revision of the failure to obey policy, and independent oversight for citizen complaints." The attorneys looked at each other. "Sir, those are policy decisions. We can't dictate that in a settlement." "Then we go to trial," Thorne said, leaning back. "And I will put the captain on the stand. I will put the former chief on the stand. And I will play every single video of Officer Miller's previous arrests that I found during discovery. I will show the jury that the city knew he was a danger and did nothing. The verdict won't be $500,000. It will be $50 million. And I will donate every cent of it to legal aid clinics that sue you." The room was silent. Thorne held all the cards. He wasn't bluffing. He was the house. 1 week later, the city agreed. The Thorne Decree was signed. It mandated that officers could not arrest for resisting arrest or failure to obey unless there was a separate independent criminal charge. It required officers to articulate reasonable suspicion on body camera before initiating a stop. It created a civilian review board with the power to fire officers. It was the most sweeping police reform in the state's history, triggered by a single cup of coffee. As for Officer Miller, the end was quiet. He was terminated for conduct unbecoming and civil rights violations. The union didn't fight it. He was stripped of his pension eligibility. The last anyone heard, he was working private security at a warehouse in Indiana, checking truck manifests at a gate. He had no authority. He had no power. He was just a man in a vest. 6 months after the arrest, Marcus Thorne returned to Millennium Park. It was another beautiful morning. The sun was shining on the bean. The tourists were out. Thorne walked to the same bench. He sat down. He placed a coffee cup next to him. He wasn't alone this time. A young black man, maybe 20 years old, was sitting on the next bench reading a book. He looked nervous as a police cruiser rolled slowly down the path. The cruiser stopped. 2 officers got out. They were new recruits. They looked at Thorne. They looked at the young man. They nodded politely. "Good morning, gentlemen," one officer said. "Morning," Thorne replied. The officers kept walking. They didn't stop. They didn't demand ID. They didn't assume the worst. They just patrolled. Thorne watched them go. He took a sip of his coffee. It tasted better this time. The system hadn't changed overnight. There were still bad stops. There was still bias. But the message had been sent loud and clear. We are watching. Thorne thought about the power he held. He had used it to crush a bad officer. Yes, but he realized that the real victory wasn't the firing of Kyle Miller. It was the fact that the young man on the bench next to him could read his book in peace. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the quiet moments of the innocent. It's about the right to sit in the sun without fear. Thorne finished his coffee, stood up, and walked back toward his office. There was work to do. This story reminds us that authority without accountability is just tyranny in a uniform. Marcus Thorne had the power to fight back, but millions of people don't. That's why we share these stories, to shine a light on the darkness. What would you have done if you were in Thorne's shoes? Would you have revealed who you were immediately? Or would you have let the officer dig his own grave, and do you think the settlement reforms were enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Stay safe out there.
Turn around. Hands on the car. You walked out with stolen merchandise.
Officer, I paid for every item. The receipt is in my hand. You are detaining me without cause.
I don't need your excuses. The manager says you stole, so you're coming with me.
You're refusing evidence and escalating unlawfully. This will end very...
Officer Derek Thorne had been wearing the badge of the Charleston Police Department for 6 years when he made a decision that would not only end his career, but strip the city's budget of $1.1 million. He was 34 years old, a man who walked with the heavy, deliberate stride of someone who believed his authority was absolute. He had a reputation in the precinct. Ambitious, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his instincts were sharper than the law itself. On a bright, cloudless Tuesday afternoon, Thorne received a dispatch call regarding a theft in progress at Sterling & Stone, a high-end home improvement store on the affluent side of town. The suspect was described as an older black woman refusing to cooperate with management. That woman was Eleanor Vance, a 62-year-old federal circuit court judge who had spent the last 3 decades interpreting the Constitution and sentencing violent offenders. What Thorne did next, ignoring her receipt, mocking her explanation, and placing her in handcuffs while she stood next to her own luxury sedan, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias blinds law enforcement to reality. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that badge and uniform should never be a shield for misconduct, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth deserves a witness, and your support helps us keep the lights on. Sterling & Stone is the kind of establishment that prides itself on curated home solutions. Located on King Street, it caters to Charleston's historic district homeowners, people who need authentic brass fixtures and imported hardwood. It smells of cedar and polish. The aisles are wide, the lighting is warm, and the staff is trained to be invisible until needed. It was 1:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. The sun was cutting sharp angles through the front glass doors. The store was relatively quiet, populated by contractors and retirees working on autumn projects. Judge Eleanor Vance had been coming here for 20 years. At 62, she moved with a quiet, formidable grace. She was dressed in casual but expensive attire, pressed linen trousers, a navy silk blouse, and comfortable loafers. She was currently overseeing the renovation of her retirement cottage on the coast, a project she had been saving for since her appointment to the bench. Eleanor Vance was not a woman who could be easily intimidated. Her career began as a public defender in Chicago, fighting in the trenches of an overburdened legal system, before moving to the prosecutor's office and finally the federal bench. She was known for her piercing intellect and her absolute intolerance for nonsense in her courtroom. Colleagues described her as a steel trap. Nothing escaped her notice, and she never spoke without purpose. That Tuesday, she was off the bench simply looking for specific brushed nickel cabinet poles and a high-grade sealant for her deck. She had found the items, but the store was out of the shopping baskets usually stacked by the door. Without a second thought, she placed the 4 small boxes of hardware and the can of sealant into her personal reusable canvas tote bag, a bag bearing the seal of the Legal Defense Fund. She kept the bag open, looped over her arm, clearly visible. She wasn't hiding anything. She was merely carrying her intended purchases to the register. However, to Kyle Reed, the store's 29-year-old manager, Eleanor Vance, wasn't a long-time customer or a federal judge. She was a liability. Reed had been transferred to the Charleston branch only 3 months prior, bringing with him a corporate climbing attitude and a deep-seated suspicion of anyone who didn't fit his narrow image of the ideal client. He watched Vance from the loss prevention monitors in the back office. He saw a black woman putting merchandise into a personal bag. He didn't see her check the price tags. He didn't see her compare the items to a list on her phone. He only saw the merchandise disappear into the canvas tote. In Reed's mind, the narrative was already written. He decided not to approach her on the floor. He wanted to catch her in the act. He watched as she walked to the register. He watched as she unloaded every single item onto the belt. He watched as she paid with a platinum credit card. But in his mind, he was convinced she must have kept something in the bag. He hadn't seen her take anything out of the bag that she hadn't put on the counter yet. His gut told him she was pulling a fast one. It was a cognitive distortion common in biased observers. The facts were changing, but his conclusion remained the same. Reed waited until she was walking toward the exit to make his move, but he didn't stop her at the door. Instead, he watched her leave and immediately dialed 911. "Charleston emergency, what is your location?" The dispatcher's voice was calm. Reed's voice was breathless, feigning a panic that wasn't there. "This is Kyle Reed, manager at Sterling & Stone on King. I have a shoplifter who just left the store. She stole several $100s worth of hardware. She's in the parking lot now, refusing to stop." This was a lie. He hadn't asked her to stop. "Can you describe the suspect?" "Black female, 60s heavyset. She's loading the stolen goods into a silver Lexus right now. I need an officer fast. She's trying to flee." The call was logged as a theft in progress. Officer Derek Thorne was 2 blocks away on patrol. When the call came over his radio, Thorne didn't hear. "Investigate a potential theft." He heard criminal fleeing scene. Derek Thorne had a file that should have precluded him from ever interacting with the public. In his 6 years on the force, he had accrued 9 formal complaints. 6 involved discourtesy or aggressive language, and 3 involved improper detention of minority citizens. In every single instance, his actions were deemed within policy by an internal review board that prioritized officer discretion over citizen rights. Thorne was the type of officer who escalated low-stakes encounters to assert dominance. He had once handcuffed a 50-year-old church deacon for jaywalking because the man didn't produce ID fast enough. He had been reprimanded for screaming at a terrified tourist who made an illegal U-turn. Thorne believed that respect was something to be taken, not earned. When he heard the dispatcher's description, black female theft fleeing, his adrenaline spiked. He didn't turn on his siren, but he accelerated, cutting through traffic with the entitlement of a man who owns the road. Do you think officers with a history of aggression should be allowed to respond to non-violent property calls? Let us know in the comments. Thorne pulled his cruiser into the Sterling and Stone lot at 1:52 p.m., blocking the exit lane. He spotted the silver Lexus immediately. The trunk was open. Judge Vance was standing there, calmly placing her canvas bag into the cargo net. She closed the trunk and turned toward her driver's side door, keys in hand. She wasn't running. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was humming a quiet tune, thinking about her contractor's schedule. Thorne slammed his cruiser into park behind her vehicle, boxing her in. He stepped out, his hand already resting on his holster, his posture wide and threatening. "Hey, you step away from the car." Eleanor Vance paused. She turned slowly, her expression one of mild confusion rather than fear. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the officer. "Excuse me, officer. Are you speaking to me?" Thorne marched within 3 feet of her, invading her personal space. "I said step away from the car. Put your hands where I can see them." Vance didn't flinch. She had stared down cartel lieutenants and serial murderers. A 34-year-old patrolman with an attitude problem was not going to rattle her. "My hands are right here," she said, holding them up, palms open. In her left hand, she held a long white strip of paper. "I am simply loading my purchases. Is there a problem?" "The problem is you walking out of that store with merchandise you didn't pay for," Thorne snapped. "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle." "Officer," Vance said, her voice dropping an octave, taking on the resonant, commanding tone she used to control her courtroom. "I have just purchased these items. This is the receipt in my hand. If you will look at it, you will see the timestamp from 3 minutes ago." She extended the hand, holding the receipt. Thorne didn't even look at it. He slapped her hand away. "I don't want to see your paper. The manager says you stole. That's probable cause. Now turn around or I will make you turn around." The air in the parking lot seemed to freeze. 2 other customers, a young couple loading mulch a few cars away, stopped what they were doing. The man pulled out his phone. He started recording. "Officer," Vance said, "you are making a grave error. I am Federal Judge Eleanor Vance. I have identification in my purse. I have a valid receipt. I am asking you to verify these facts before you escalate this further." Thorne scoffed. "Yeah, and I'm the Chief Justice. Turn around." He didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed her right wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Vance gasped in pain. She had arthritis in that shoulder, but she did not resist. She knew the law better than he ever would. Resisting arrest was a trap charge used to justify excessive force. She went limp, allowing him to maneuver her. "I am complying," she stated loudly for the benefit of the witnesses. "I am not resisting. You are hurting my shoulder. I am alerting you to a medical condition." Thorne ignored her. "Stop fighting," he yelled, playing to a camera he hoped would back him up despite her clear lack of resistance. He shoved her against the hot metal of her car door. He pulled her other arm back and ratcheted the handcuffs too tight. The metal bit into the soft skin of her wrists. "You're under arrest for shoplifting and resisting an officer." "I did not resist," Vance said, her face pressed against the window of her own car. "And I did not shoplift. The receipt is on the ground where you knocked it." Thorne didn't pick up the receipt. He didn't call the manager out to identify her. He didn't ask for her ID. He had his suspect, he had his arrest, and in his mind he had won. He spun her around and marched her toward his squad car. "You have the right to remain silent," Thorne recited, roughly pushing her head down as he shoved her into the cramped back seat of the cruiser. Vance sat awkwardly, her hands numb behind her back. She looked him in the eye through the plexiglass divider. "Officer," she said, her voice deadly calm, "I am waiving my right to silence to inform you that you are currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. You have failed to conduct a preliminary investigation. You have refused exculpatory evidence presented to you at the scene. You are acting under color of law to deprive a citizen of liberty without probable cause." Thorne laughed as he got into the driver's seat. "You know, some big words for a shoplifter. Save it for the public defender." The drive to the station took 15 minutes. Thorne played loud rock music on the radio, a petty power move designed to unsettle his prisoner. Vance sat in silence, closing her eyes, breathing deeply to manage the pain in her shoulder. She was not praying. She was building a case. She memorized the time. She memorized his badge number, 492. She memorized the route. She cataloged every procedural failure. He hadn't buckled her seatbelt, a violation of department safety policy. He was speeding without lights or sirens. He was texting on his mounted laptop while driving. By the time they pulled into the precinct, Sally Port Eleanor Vance wasn't just a victim. She was a prosecutor, preparing for the easiest conviction of her life. Thorne pulled Vance out of the car, parading her through the back entrance of the station. He walked with a swagger, guiding her by the elbow toward the booking desk. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller, a 58-year-old veteran who had been with the force for 30 years. Miller was the kind of cop who knew the name of every shopkeeper in his district. He had testified in federal court dozens of times. As Thorne approached the desk, pushing Vance forward, Miller looked up from his paperwork. He squinted, adjusting his reading glasses. Then his face went completely white. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the file cabinets with a loud crash. "Thorne," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" "Got a shoplifter from Sterling and Stone," Thorne said, beaming. "Refused to stop, resisted arrest. Tried to give me some story about being a judge." The station went quiet. Sergeant Miller walked around the desk. He didn't look at Thorne. He looked at the woman in handcuffs. "Judge Vance?" Miller asked, his voice horrified. Eleanor Vance looked at the sergeant. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. I believe you testified in my courtroom last month regarding the smuggling case. It is good to see you, although I wish the circumstances were different." Thorne looked between them, his smile faltering. You know her." "Thorne." Miller whispered the sound more terrifying than a scream. "This is Judge Eleanor Vance. She sits on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit." Thorne's face turned the color of ash. She said..." "She told you who she was?" Miller asked, turning on his subordinate. "She identified herself." "I thought she was lying," Thorne stammered. "She fit the description. The manager said..." "Did you check her receipt?" Miller barked. "Did you check her ID?" Thorne swallowed hard. The manager said she was running." "I was loading my car," Vance interjected calmly. "The receipt was in my hand. Officer Thorne knocked it to the ground. It is likely still blowing across the parking lot on King Street." "Uncuff her," Miller ordered. "Now." Thorne fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the lock. Miller shoved him aside and did it himself. As the metal clicked open, Vance brought her hands forward, rubbing her bruised wrists. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "I would like to file a formal complaint, and I would like a photographer to document these contusions on my wrists before they fade. Also, my shoulder will need medical attention." Miller looked at Thorne. "Give me your badge and your gun. Go sit in the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone." Thorne stood frozen. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the dawning, nauseating realization that his life, as he knew it, was over. Captain Reynolds arrived 10 minutes later. He had been called out of a meeting with the mayor. When he saw Judge Vance sitting in a chair, icing her wrist, he looked as if he might have a stroke. "Judge Vance," Reynolds said, "I don't even know where to begin. On behalf of the entire department." "Save it, Captain," Vance said. "I want the body camera footage secured immediately. I want the dash cam footage. I want the 911 call recording, and I want the name of the manager at Sterling & Stone." "You'll have it all," Reynolds promised. "We are launching an immediate internal affairs investigation." "This isn't just internal affairs," Vance said, standing up. "This is a violation of federal civil rights. I will be contacting the Department of Justice, and I will be suing this city not for the money, but to ensure that Officer Thorne never carries a weapon again." The fallout was swift and brutal. The bystander video from the parking lot hit the internet that evening. The visual of a young white officer aggressively twisting the arm of an elegant older black woman while she calmly held up a receipt went viral instantly. The headline, "Cop assaults federal judge over $40 in hardware." By morning, it was national news. The audio of the 911 call was released 2 days later. It was damning. Kyle Reed's frantic claims of fleeing were juxtaposed with the security footage from the store, which showed Vance walking at a leisurely pace, stopping to check a text message before exiting. Reed had fabricated the emergency to justify his bias. Sterling & Stone fired Kyle Reed immediately. They issued a public apology pledging a donation to the Legal Defense Fund, an irony that was not lost on Judge Vance. But apologies do not erase humiliation. The city of Charleston knew they had no defense. Their officer had ignored exculpatory evidence, used excessive force, and arrested a federal judge without probable cause. The settlement negotiations were short. The city agreed to pay $1.1 million to Judge Eleanor Vance. But Vance didn't keep the money. She established a scholarship fund for law students from underrepresented communities, specifically for those interested in civil rights law. Officer Derek Thorne was terminated. But Judge Vance wasn't satisfied with the firing. She pressed charges. Thorne was indicted for deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded guilty to avoid a federal prison sentence, accepting a deal that included surrendering his law enforcement certification permanently. He would never be a police officer again. At 34, he was working construction carrying lumber instead of a gun. Kyle Reed, the manager, was blacklisted from the retail industry. His name became synonymous with the Karen phenomenon, a cautionary tale for every manager who thinks profiling is loss prevention. When asked by a reporter why she pursued the case so vigorously, Judge Vance gave a statement that silenced the room. "I spent 30 years in a robe protected by the power of the bench, and it took less than 30 seconds for a man with a badge to decide that my life's work, my dignity, and my rights meant nothing because of the color of my skin. If he would do that to a federal judge, imagine what he has been doing to people who have no voice, no power, and no platform. I didn't fight for me. I fought for them." The check was cut. The officers were fired. The policies were rewritten. But the scar remains. It serves as a reminder that bias is a rot that eats away at the foundation of justice. It's a reminder that a badge does not grant the right to ignore the truth. Officer Thorne saw what he wanted to see, and it cost him everything. Judge Vance stood her ground, and in doing so, she exposed a system that was waiting to fail her. What do you think is the solution? Should officers be required to carry personal liability insurance so taxpayers aren't footing the bill for their misconduct? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if you believe in accountability and truth, please like this video and share it. It helps us continue this work. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and know your rights.